Hello, listeners. My name is Rob, and I'm here virtually alongside my co-hosts Noah.
Hello.
And Em.
Hi.
The regular cast of Fax Machine, a podcast by and for people who are curious about everything, but especially the things that make them laugh. And today, I am very pleased to welcome our special guest, Rachel Richards.
Woo!
Woohoo! Hey!
So, Ray is a visual communication specialist, science nerd, and she is the creative director of EA Creative and the founder of Coriolis Magazine. So, Ray, thanks so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. We're really looking forward to see how your strengths in data visualization translate to podcast form.
Coriolis Magazine, that's so familiar. Where have I seen somebody's, or maybe somebody I know with some sort of article in Coriolis
famous
Magazine?
Author.
Your very own. Your very own.
Oh, M. Costa.
I'm trying to hide behind my script on a Zoom, and it doesn't really translate to audio, so I guess I'll stop.
Famed science writer,
Okay.
M. Costa.
Okay.
It's true. With an excellent piece about COVID vaccines.
Oh, well, I was extremely excited to have the opportunity to contribute to Coriolis, which is an awesome and just gorgeous-looking magazine. Like, that website is stunning.
Thank you.
Definitely worth checking out.
Thank you. Yeah, all the science nerds. Got to get on it.
That's what we do. So, also, thank you, Ray, for picking a theme for us for this episode. I'm really excited about it. Because in this episode, we're looking to solve the ancient mysteries of time. We seek to find meaning where none is apparent. We hope to unscramble the senseless jumbles before us and uncover the truth. Yes. Today, we shall crack the codes.
Why are you talking like this?
Just happens.
I just went full Shatner on you guys.
We're in a Zoom, but somehow, like, your frame got tighter and tighter very slowly on your face while you stared into the middle distance.
I was genuinely expecting you to end that with, as we step into the Twilight Zone. That exact
The Twilight
vibe.
Zoom.
That's perfect. That's how I want you to feel. I want you to be on edge, never knowing what's right before you. The beauty of all codes and ciphers. But in this episode, Noah, Em, and Ray are going to orate on obscurity and spin yarns on ciphers as we discuss the best code facts that have ever been. And so, with no further ado, let's get things started with Noah.
This week I learned that unlike the Caesar salad, the Caesar cipher is actually named for Julius Caesar.
What?
Right. Yes, indeed. The Caesar salad is not named after Julius Caesar. It is instead attributed to the restaurateur Caesar Cardini from the early 1920s. He was an Italian immigrant who operated restaurants in both Mexico and the U.S. He was living in San Diego, but he was actually working in Tijuana, which allowed him to, like, evade prohibition restrictions.
Wow.
Huh.
That is... that's wow.
Yeah,
Actually-
well, basically, that's not necessarily, like, cryptography related, but I thought it was a very interesting fact.
I think Cardini's is a brand of salad dressing too, and I'm assuming it's the same.
Oh, maybe.
I mean,
that's interesting.
there are probably only so many in the salad game, but okay.
Well, because it was Caesar and his brother Alex Cardini, so maybe it's like the Cardini. I think their restaurant was, or one of them was called the Hotel Cardini, so they may be like a brand.
Funny how there's no Alex salad.
I was about to ask.
So the scene, let me take you back to 1992 for a question. The scene where Prince Ali of Abwa comes into Agrabah and there's a whole parade and Caesar comes because all the world leaders are invited and there's a huge salad. Right. That's false.
Right.
Oh,
that is false.
Did not remember that detail.
At the time, they actually did not have the technology required to make croutons. Yeah.
We could just dry some bread out in the sun, though.
They hadn't thought of that. It seems like now we look back and we're like, wow, the people who lived back in those days were so dumb. But they really were just as smart as us. It's just that we have the benefit of having our like knowledge about drying bread, like built on centuries and centuries of bread technology. I mean, since then we've had sliced bread, which, I mean, it's the best thing since itself at the time.
We're truly standing on the crusts of giants.
Oh my god, what was my fact about?
Everyone knew that was going to be the end of Caesar salads.
Anyway, I'm here to tell you about the Caesar cipher, which actually is named after Julius Caesar. And anyone who, like me, has completed only the first 2 or 3 assignments of an online coding course multiple times, thank you very much, knows about the Caesar cipher, also known as the shift cipher, one of the simplest encryption techniques that exists, and also one of the oldest. The way it works is that each letter in a message that you want to encode is replaced by another letter that is a certain number of letters away in the alphabet. For example, if your message is, "This week I learned," and you shifted 13 letters to the right, and also wrapped around to the beginning once you pass Z, your encrypted message would read, "Guvf jerks for yrnyyl."
Thanks for that.
I wish I could show you how this is spelled, but it's a podcast. You're just going to have to go and try it yourself with a shift of 13. You can actually go either direction with a shift of 13 because there's 26 letters, so it ends up being the same thing. But you, as I basically just prefaced, you can also shift in the other direction. So if we encrypted "This week I learned" by shifting each letter in the message to the left by 4 letters in the alphabet, it would read something like "Padeo saggy hanjaws."
How many different ciphers?
And if you're thinking to yourself, did Noah just go clicking through every single possible Caesar cipher shift to
There
look
it
for the
is.
ones that sounded the funniest? You betcha.
Some ciphertext is really, really rich. And I have to say, you've got yourself 2 strings of incredibly rich ciphertext there.
Well, you know what I always say, "Goof jerks for yrnyyl." But basically, this is more or less the method that Julius Caesar used to send like secret messages to his generals. And for this, we have the word of the Roman historian Suetonius in his work, The 12 Caesars, where he relates, "If he had anything confidential to say, he wrote it in cipher, that is, by so changing the order of letters of the alphabet that not a word could be made out. If anyone wishes to decipher these and get at their meaning, he must substitute the 4th letter of the alphabet, namely D, for A, and so with the others." And even like, apparently Julius Caesar's nephew Augustus also used it with a small alteration, with the quote, "Wherever he wrote in cipher, he wrote B for A, C for B, and the rest of the letters in the same principle, using AA for Z." So it didn't actually wrap around. If you just had like Z with a shift of 1, it became AA, which is slightly more complicated, but still not all that secure. And that's because the major problem with the Caesar cipher is that all you have to do is try all the possible shifts until one looks like words.
25 chances.
Yeah. Or what if the biggest trick would just be to like have it not encoded? But
Right.
It's just
they're
gibberish.
trying to, why can't I make this make sense? It says the troops are going to be there at dawn. What are they saying? But so anyway, the major problem with this, right, is that all you have to do, as I said, is try like all the possible shifts. But you could actually get a little fancier by using something like the known letter frequencies in the language that you think the message is in. For example, in English, the letter E is used way more often than other letters, as it turns out. So all you really need to do is figure out what are the most used letters in the encoded message and what their shifts would be based on that. And if, like, by just some quirk, E in this particular message isn't used, you could just have to go and checklist 2nd and 3rd and 4th, say, and odds are one of them's going to be E.
The word "the" actually is a really important word when you're talking about trying to decipher through frequency analysis. In English, it's hard to say any sentence without the word "the." So anytime you see a 3-letter word within your ciphertext, if you start matching E at the end of it, you can almost always figure out the key.
And that's
because
like
that shift text is so simple.
right. And that's like even in sort of more complicated encryption, like that is what gets people, like it, like with sort of repeating patterns. Like I think I'm not sure if this is true. I just remember reading something about how part of what helped the Allies crack Enigma was that so many of they just got lazy. Like the sort of Nazi officers just kind of they were always like ending messages with things like Heil Hitler and stuff like that. And it was like looking for those...
it was protocol. It was Nazi language protocol. Führer was another word that was just constantly used. But the Enigma had some weaknesses because it couldn't actually encode one letter for itself ever. So the letter F could never be right. So because of that, that was a big vulnerability because of that. And because they more or less just needed about 20 characters. If they figure out like words like Heil Hitler or Führer or certain words that they constantly ended communications with, 20 characters or so, then they were able to completely decipher the string of text due to this one particular weakness that Enigma had with not being able to encrypt one letter as itself ever.
I mean, that just really underscores how like the worst enemy, you know, that like our secret messages have are ourselves, and like the way that we write them. It's not, I mean, sometimes it is just the issue is like you don't, your code is, you know, whatever, encryption isn't as secure as it should be. But other times, as in many of these examples throughout history, it's just like you are leaving breadcrumbs in like the structure of language completely like abstracted from what is actually in the words or that you see on the page. But I think like in addition to those things, it's worth thinking about how something like the Caesar cipher may have been more useful than we might think in Julius Caesar's time. So first of all, according to Joseph Pierre-Prizik's Fundamentals of Computer Security, many of Caesar's enemies would have been illiterate, for one, and still others may not have recognized it as code at all, and instead may have mistaken that jumble of letters that they saw for another language they just didn't know. But it should be mentioned that, like, at the time, there were other issues. Like, for example, if you take for granted that the code is in English, it becomes a lot easier to, like, get at these sort of structural patterns in the language. Obviously, you know, as mentioned there, it helps to be able to, you know, read any language, right? Like a lot of these things that are sort of characteristic of that time that made that a much more secure method, in addition to the fact that they're just, you know, that was sort of state of the art at the time. It should be mentioned, however, that it's also thought that Julius Caesar used different, more complex methods of encoding messages. And the Roman author Aulus Gellius, Rob, can I get a pronunciation check on that?
The problem is there could be so many of them.
Okay, Aulus, last name Gellius. I'm going to go with Aulus Gellius.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. I probably would have called him Gallius, so yeah.
Look, he's not going to write in, so.
It's fine. We just weren't ready for this Gellius. It's okay. Yeah.
How does that joke come up so often?
I don't know.
Oh, I love it. But in his work, Attic Nights, he says, there is even a rather ingeniously written treatise by the grammarian Probus concerning the secret meaning of letters in the composition of Caesar's epistles. And it's basically alluding to this like even like more sophisticated method that would have been in use at the time. However, the work by Probus that is referenced has been lost, which I think you'll agree is the ultimate form of security.
Yes. So this week I learned that in medieval times, people amused themselves by urinating on their hands to see who was a virgin. So
not just in medieval times, though. I do that every day.
Come back to that,
sure.
hopefully not. Okay. Well, anyways, so this fact, which we'll return to at some point, is actually part of a larger story that I want to tell you guys about sympathetic ink, or as it's better known, invisible ink. So when I first started looking into this, you know, my first association was like lemon juice and heat. Like you do this in elementary school science experiments and fairs and what have you, and write like school sucks, and then, you know, put a little flame under the paper and it shows up. And that's an example of like a very basic formula for invisible ink. So you have your invisible ink that you apply to a surface, and then a reagent or a reactant that makes the ink appear, be it a chemical, heat, like with the lemon juice, or even ultraviolet light. An invisible ink is actually a type of steganography, which is a kind of encryption that's predicated on concealing your message rather than scrambling it. So basically, in some way where like you can be looking at it and not recognize it unless you know how to change it in order to be able to read it. Though it certainly can be and has been combined with cryptology to hide messages really well, so make them invisible and then also make them inscrutable, unless you know what to do. So I wanted to share a few of my favorite anecdotes from this really cool book titled Prisoners, Lovers, and Spies, The Story of Invisible Ink from Herodotus to Al-Qaeda by Christy Makrakis. And it covers, as the title suggests, the history of invisible ink from antiquity. The last story that I'll mention is from the World War, so not quite as recent as Al-Qaeda. But I found it really interesting because, as I said, I always, associated invisible ink conceptually with just kind of like a fun hobbyist kind of thing to do, or like an activity to while away the afternoons when I was a kid. But it's had significant roles in espionage and encryption, and even in love across times and cultures. So let's delve in. So some of my favorite stories from invisible ink in antiquity. One involves the Roman poet Ovid of Metamorphosis fame. He also wrote a sort of like relationships and seduction manual that was very popular in his time called The Art of Love, which I have to say I want to look up and will probably come up at some point in another future podcast episode. So keep an eye out for that, because what could they have been thinking? I'm intrigued.
Or as he was known after that book, Ovid.
Okay. But one of his tips from The Art of Love.
One of his tips. Sorry.
I just waltzed right into that one, which is very much my style. So he recommended that young women communicate with their clandestine suitors by writing messages in milk, and then staining them with charcoal to reveal the messages. And actually, friend of the pod, Pliny the Elder, alluded to a similar technique in his Natural History, though in his case it involved writing with the extract of an herb called goat's lettuce. But it's lettuce for goats. But most intriguing to me, possibly the earliest written recipe for invisible ink was by Philo of Byzantium, and he was a Greek engineer and writer in the late 200s BCE, who described a technique whereby you write in tannic acid derived from oak galls. And I don't know if you guys have seen those. I actually haven't in person, but when you see like bumps on oak trees, there's sort of like these bulbous like protrusions from the bark that basically form around the larva of gull wasps, which can like lay their larvae, they'll lay their larvae in the bark. Then the trees kind of build this as a sort of like protective, almost like immune response to it. But you can extract from that this tannic acid, and then they would basically write on the surface with this acid and then wash over it with iron sulfate or vitriol to reveal the writing, which, first of all, like for me, I just love the idea of like writing something like scathing and satirical and then literally revealing it with vitriol. But also this formulation, like this combination of tannic acid and iron sulfate from literally like tree blobs, was the composition of ink in Europe for 15 centuries. So like Shakespeare's plays, like box compositions, just like any like knowledge and creative output that happened during that time was all written in this same ink. And kind of a challenge to this in terms of preservation now is that it's actually inherently corrosive. It is, tannic acid is an acid. But I kind of love too that then makes it like, an invisible ink that is also like inadvertently like reversible. And that like it can disappear with time. And as you mentioned, Noah, that is, the ultimate way to hide a message. Just destroy it so no one can read it again.
I wonder if, like, I just don't really know anything about how that works. So basically because it's acidic, the ink loses its color or somehow.
So,
because I was imagining if what it does maybe is like etches the letters into like the rawhide, that'd be great.
No, so it disintegrates the paper after a while. Yeah. So if you look up like images of documents that have suffered from this, they'll just have kind of like sort of pieces of paper missing where they're like thicker sort of like strokes of the ink. But they're like the preservationists have figured out ways to kind of like go around that. But for certain documents that are still, found after a long time and not stored ideally, that's something that they can suffer from.
I'm just curious, like, if you're going to talk more about why it's in this book. Because I feel like if you go to the library and you're like, where do I find the recipe for invisible ink? And I go to, like, the love and relationships section, it's like, go and pull out the Kama Sutra and you turn to the page to find out how to clean battery terminals when, like, the batteries explode. Like, oh, no. This seems really out of place.
Well, a lot of things in the love section do require batteries.
Yes. In the self-love section, yes. But no, actually, a more formal recipe or like series of recipes for invisible ink came much later. I'm blanking. I could just look it up. But like basically, like a scientist and alchemist during the Inquisition wrote the natural arts, like this is just gigantic tome that had all sorts of like ways to formulate things from nature, including lots and lots of invisible inks.
The Inquisition.
That's
Inquisition.
Okay. Yes. Very, very good. Very good.
Thank you.
But so a few centuries after, the ancient Greeks were messing around with milk and gallnuts, the Chinese were scribbling their secret messages using alum, otherwise known as aluminum potassium sulfate, which is what styptic pencils are made of. So like if you get nicks and cover them, it's that same chalky white stuff. And those could be revealed with water. And the Arabs at the same time were also further developing these aforementioned methods, as well as expanding them in terms of like the different additives and reagents that you could use to reveal messages. And actually, the lemon juice and heat combination dates all the way back to the Ottoman Empire, about 600 AD. So next time you do that at home in your kitchen to while away the hours, you can think of like, the historical tradition that you are preserving. It's pretty amazing. But so now to fast forward-ish to my fact. So in the medieval period, secret writing gained associations with the occult and alchemy. As you might expect, it has this kind of mystical quality to it that you sprinkle a chemical and then words magically appear, or seemingly magically, alchemy. But it was also used by artisans and craftspeople to record and keep secret the tricks of their trades. So like people who made dyes for textiles or metalworkers or even recipes would kind of document their, secret sauces in invisible ink. And then it was actually these are all later published and became bestsellers with the invention of the printing press as so-called books of secrets, which I just love because it's like these are published now on a massive scale. They are no longer secrets, but also like that's very imaginable to me is like an innate element of human nature of like, of course, like, all of this press comes out for Mary Trump's book and Fire and Fury and what have you, and like slap secret onto a book and everyone's going to want to read it. So sure, makes sense. They're leaking all of these methods. But yes, so my fact comes from a parlor game that was referenced by Macrakis in this book. And basically the way that it worked is that, she found this recipe and then cited it in the book. The way that it worked is that, someone would put urine on their hand and let it dry because then you can't see it, though you could probably still smell it, but I don't want to imagine that too deeply. And then basically the trick would be that you'd gather your friends around and be like, all right, I'm going to sprinkle some ash in my hand and I'm going to do the sign of the cross and say, all right, like I'm going to, summon the heavens and they'll reveal whether I'm a virgin or not. But secretly they would actually write like no on their hand with the urine beforehand. And then while their friends were looking away like, oh, are they a virgin? This is crazy. What's going to happen? They would like cavalierly blow off the excess ash and then know what they revealed on their hands. And I have to wonder, like, did anyone actually do this or believe this? But supposedly
well,
it's a thing
ironically,
that
pissing on your hand is one way to be a virgin forever.
There you go. They were playing themselves.
There also definitely is like a switch. I don't know exactly where in history that was, where people went from trying to convince everyone that they hadn't had sex to trying to convince everyone that they had.
Right.
And I don't know when in history that switch was. Like, when would that game have moved from writing yes in ash to no in ash?
I'm going to guess like the 1920s.
Prohibition era.
Yeah.
Because of all the Caesar salads.
There you go. Well, there it is.
Liberated.
Well, there it is.
Oh. I totally interpreted that as like what age in your life, and I was like, well, probably whatever age that you'd be willing to like piss on your hand to impress your friends.
Well, that was shockingly early for me. I was just as likely to piss on my hand or my parents' hands, the ceiling, really, whatever. Don't roll me on my back.
It's
And I'm
Still good advice to this day.
I'm just trying to remember when the movie Easy A came out, because I feel like that was kind of, I don't know if that was a new turning point.
Oh, yeah.
The what?
The movie Easy A with what was that, Emma Stone?
It's like the Scarlet Letter.
Yeah, it's like the new
modern-day
Scarlet
reboot
Letter.
thing.
No, I've
Where she,
never
like-
seen it. I'm not familiar.
Maybe it
with
was
this.
when the Scarlet Letter came out.
Well, that was one time. Somewhere between the Scarlet Letter and the movie Easy A, there was a cultural switch.
Just somewhere between that timeline. That's just a small
only-
fragment of time.
If only historians had any records about like women's health in that whole time period.
But unfortunately, they're either lost or encoded.
Ooh. Sadly,
Yeah.
that's not altogether untrue.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Wasn't a point of investigation for a long time, let's just say.
Yeah.
Yeah,
True.
it still lags in many ways.
Yes.
But so to leap forward a few more decades, centuries, what have you. So, invisible ink continued to be used throughout the ages. Mary, Queen of Scots, used a combination of ciphers and invisible inks to communicate to her supporters from prison, to plot rebellions and try to assassinate and overthrow her sister. Just typical, sister drama. You know how it is. A type of invisible ink was also invented by James Jay, the brother of John Jay, though the recipe has actually been lost to time. Again, very effective in messaging. That
Gotta
was used
stop
among...
writing it in invisible ink.
Yeah, exactly. Works too well. But it was used among the Culper Sky Ring. Or, no. It was used among the
The
Culper...
Sky Ring.
Sky Ring.
Like a science fiction plot.
There you go. And it was used among the Culper Spy Ring to communicate British tactics that were happening in New York to George Washington during the American Revolution.
One of the things I looked into when I was looking into basically the Caesar cipher is not a super effective method of encryption, but there is a possible situation where you'd want to make something look like it was secret, but not actually be difficult, or maybe just be slightly more than trivial, so that to decode, so that the person who intercepts it by design thinks that it's real intelligence that they've gathered, and that you could then put in that message that, oh, we're moving our troops north when really you're moving it west. So it's designed to be broken and lead the people astray. So I was trying to look up if that had happened over time, and apparently one of the examples was of the British using that against the Americans the soon-to-be Americans in the Revolutionary War.
Huh.
Jerks.
Wow.
You're not fighting fair. As we hopped down from the tree, shot them, and ran away.
Listen, guerrilla
Still not over
warfare was what it was.
And if they can't handle the big gorillas coming at them, they shouldn't have brought the war to the zoo.
There you go.
We wailed on them.
Then we brought it to the aquarium for that.
The British did have the jrrx.
Oh my God, no.
What a reach.
If you're a giraffe, you can reach.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so the last anecdote that I wanted to share was from World War I. So it involves a group called the Lemon Juice Spies, and surprisingly, it's not a kid show. It was an actual group of spies in World War I. Actually, there's a few dudes, but two of them are the main characters in this story. So they're both German spies, Karl Muller and John Hahn. And they were both stationed in England and basically communicating British troop movements to the Germans, again, using this very classic lemon juice and heat invisible ink combination. So their letters were eventually discovered by the British Postal Censorship, which was headquartered in London and basically just screening mail going into and out during World War I. And firstly, so I'm telling this story because it is just a series of bumbles that I think are a bit hilarious and also very necessary. But the first was that they very easily traced the letters back to both Muller and Hahn, because Hahn was signing all of the letters with his real name, which I feel like that's the first rookie mistake, real rookie mistake. But then Upon doing this, Scotland Yard got a warrant to search his house, and they arrested him and Mueller and 3 other spies involved in the lemon juice ring. And when they were on trial, the following items were submitted as evidence in court. So from Han's apartment, a lemon riddled with pen nib-sized holes, which just I love the mental image of Exhibit A, and it's just a rotting lemon with a bunch of holes in it. And then from Mueller's apartment, a drawer of lemon pieces and pens clogged with lemon pulp. They also found a full lemon in his coat pocket at arrest. I guess he just carried around for easy access in case he had to jot something down for his memory. And when asked what it was by the police, he pointed to his mouth and said, my teeth?
Oh.
Yeah, totally. But I can't reconcile how easily they were caught because literally the evidence their weapon would have you was biodegradable. Just compost that shit when you're done. And It could have been so simple.
It is super remarkable that to be defined by such a simple thing. It would be nowadays it's oh, I'm the guy that always I can't imagine a good one. I'm the guy that leaves a banana peel in the house that I rob. And you I don't know why you would do that.
It's just your signature.
That's your thing. It's like the Wet Bandits from Home Alone, but just a little Mario Kart. But you come to my apartment and I just have 1,000 bananas. And I always have bananas. It's so unnecessary to be that prepared.
And you'd be the banana bandit.
How many homes do you imagine this person robbing? If they leave a banana, I mean, presumably they've got to rob the house before it goes off. This is 1,000 houses in the time it takes for a banana to.
Yeah. That's why I think it's so ridiculous that not only were there lemons in all their drawers and on their desks, but they're in their pockets.
In their pockets and their drawers, just the pens filled with lemon pulp. It's just try to be good at your job.
I just imagine you open the briefcase and it's just lemons.
Bouncing out across the courtroom floor.
They could have had a sideline with a lemonade stand. Oh, we are selling lemonades. Nothing funny happening here.
Definitely would have been their friend.
This is not suspicious.
So we're all talking about secret languages and secret codes. Cryptology itself is the science of making and breaking those codes. There are some examples of encryption that are a little bit less known. And so what I want to talk about tonight is the Navajo code. The Navajo code is the only spoken military code never to have been deciphered. And it was used in World War II. It's really a really interesting story, namely because the reason why the Navajo language was chosen is because it's a language that has very complex forms of conjugations and sounds and structure. And at the time, during World War II, there were about 30 white Americans who could speak it. Only 30 white Americans. No German, Italian, or Japanese person had ever studied the language either. So the language on its own would have been perfect, but a code of sorts was applied to it. But the code itself was language-based. So the cipher and the key really didn't have much to do with traditional encryption methods. Also, the Navajo tribe in the US was a really, really large tribe. And so there was a potentially very large pool of code talkers that they would be able to choose from. And so 4 major points about the Navajo language that made it an incredible encryption method. Navajo is a tonal language. It has 4 tones: low, high, rising, and falling. The meaning of a word depends upon the tone in which is spoken, like most tonal languages. But speakers of non-tonal languages miss hearing the essential elements. And so distinctions in words can be completely and totally looked over. The linguistic structure of Navajo, it's actually radically different from all the other indigenous languages. It wouldn't be easy to understand the meaning of a Navajo sentence, even if a literal word-by-word translation were available. So on its own, again, it's just this remarkable form of communication that was relatively unknown at the time. Also, it belongs to a different family of languages. So even an expert in indigenous languages really wouldn't be able to decipher what was being said. Also, next to nothing was published about this language anywhere in the world. So even academics couldn't go and look things up or find any references for it. So it was a really strong code to be used.
That sounds so crazy, like in terms of what it must have been like the Navajo people, what kind of interactions do they have with other indigenous peoples? Like, did they just know other languages better, or like were they really just very isolated? Like, how did it become so unique?
Yeah, I don't know a tremendous amount of the origins. I think that it's traced back to tribes that were in Canada. And so there was an isolation factor for that. But again, indigenous languages didn't evolve the same way that European languages did. So there are these distinguishing differences between them. And Navajo happens to be one of those that's just really, really diverse. So one of the things that was, a great advantage to using this was that it was instantaneous. So back then, if you wanted to encode or encrypt a message, or you wanted to communicate a written message securely, you had to actually type it out, and then you had to pass it off to a code person who would then encipher it. And that could take an hour or two. I think the rough estimated time was about 2 hours. But with Navajo code talkers, this was instantaneous. They just spoke to each other directly straight over the radio. So a code could be received and then passed off within minutes. And that was a really, really big advantage in terms of comms, especially in real time, field coordinates, and really important things that needed to be communicated immediately. Also interesting to this story is that the Navajo, after the war was over, the US government forbid them to ever talk about their involvement and their unique contributions because of the secrecy of their code. And so we didn't even know until 1968 this incredible code that could never be broken was thanks entirely to our indigenous population. And so it was made public in the late 60s. And then sometime in the 80s, they were honored with some sort of commemoration day. But for all that time, this, wicked difficult code that nobody could crack was, a product of the Navajo language.
And just the combination that we still haven't cracked it, but that it could be deciphered like upon hearing is very surprising to me. Like, it's just like,
right.
Oh, like it's not even like in its regular use, it didn't require a lot of like sitting down and taking apart, but it's just that intricate,
right?
That you kind of have to know it or not. That's really cool.
Yeah, so it was a language code. So in Navajo, they didn't actually have militarized language. So they just came up with their own natural words that they then attributed to something specific. So for example, the word turtle in Navajo meant tank. So the code speakers just knew those changes. It was an actual language code.
Gotcha. Okay.
And
so basically, a lot of they were just regular words for which became like euphemisms for military.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Right.
But they were so hard to hear phonetically that you would be like turtles, 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 and they'd still be like, "What are they saying?" Like they wouldn't be able to separate that. That's wild.
It is. It's really interesting, and it's really a departure from actually more classical forms of cryptology, which was also made it even more difficult for people to figure it out. They were just people were really wilding, like, what is this? Trying to take the phonetic sounds that they heard and trying to figure out what cipher it could possibly be, or what the key might be, and they could never break this code. And actually, during the time, the Japanese were brilliant code breakers. So every code that the Americans came up with, the Japanese would crack it almost instantly. So this proved to be really, really, really critical. This was, a really important part, a really important role for the U.S. In the big World War II game in terms of getting comms across. Also, just to backtrack as a couple of fun things to throw in before we wrap, coded language actually, goes back to the beginning of language itself, as far as we know. The earliest known code was an inscription carved into a rock by an Egyptian scribe in 1900 BC. So that's 3,900 years of encrypted code, which is interesting in itself.
People always got secrets.
Yes, yes. Another early example is a small enciphered stone tablet that was found on the banks of the Tigris River. That was 1500 BC. And it contained a hidden recipe for glazing pottery, which at the time would have been really, really valuable for artisans to not, they wouldn't want their recipes known.
Wow.
And then in Sparta, this is another interesting form of encryption. In Sparta, a physical instrument was used to encipher messages between legions. And it's called a skidily. It was a type of transposition cipher. Yeah. So you would use a cylinder of a set diameter. The diameter itself was the key. So anyone that you were sending this message to had to have the exact same diameter. And it would wrap a piece of parchment around it and write down the side of it, so that you had to have that specific diameter in order to be able to see the message. Unraveled, it would be completely scrambled, just letters all over the place. And that's from the 7th century BC. So those are all, slightly different forms of encryption. And this Navajo code is, just another different format.
That's really neat.
That's super cool.
I think also recently, I just wanted to say it's relevant to this, is that how the Washington, D.C. football team is changing its name.
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan Nez, who's the president of Navajo Nation, suggested that they should rename the team Code Talkers.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. You know what? It's so relevant, and I didn't even know that.
It's also just a very cool team.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
And so we're on to the final section of today's show, our crypto quiz.
Woohoo!
All right, so I've got 8 questions for you guys.
Do I need a pen?
You might. I tried to avoid any real code breaking in the quiz.
Oh, I was so ready to break a code.
But so the good news is, at least 2 of the questions,
Man.
at least 2 of the questions will have some kind of decoding element.
All right.
Being in audio media, it is a little hard to do a lot of encryption, but you'll see as we go through. And in fact, even with question number 1, you might want a sheet of paper. So I'm going to rephrase it a little bit. So I have a very good feeling about you guys getting this based on how the episode has gone so far. But question number 1, and I'm going to cut some of the backstory. Can you decode this message? GBDUT NBDIJOF.
You say it again.
It's GBDUT NBDIJOF.
Are there
GBDUT NBDIJOF?
Yes.
Are there spaces anywhere in there?
There's a space where after the T before the N.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Yeah. So yeah, it is a 5 and then 7.
It's fax machine.
There she
fax
is.
machine.
It is.
It's a Caesar. It's just over by 1.
Yes, it is.
-1. Yeah.
It's a Caesar cipher of 1.
Yeah.
And I was looking at it, so many in my head. I was going through. It could also be wood counter. WOULDCOUNTER.
Ooh.
It could also be.
What?
No, I didn't come up with anything else.
Wow.
Anyway,
Nice.
Could it really?
I went deep. I wasn't thinking Caesar. Gosh, fax machine. All right.
Yeah.
We're good. Fax machine.
And I was like, question 1, I'll start off easy. And I was originally going to say, using the cipher in vogue for 1,500 years after a one-time national leader had developed it, please use this. But you clearly did not need it. So yeah, that's a Caesar.
I also want to say there's another solution to this. It's if you go 1 to the right, it's fax machine. If you go 9 to the right, it's exsulkazuzafu.
That's the extra credit answer.
That's true. I had not expected it. But yeah.
Ooh, there's another good one. Plus 20 is Majaz Theopul. These are all so fun to say. All right, I'm done.
But yeah,
Sorry.
So that's our Caesar cipher, or our nth shift cipher. So question 1, nicely done. You've already uncovered fax machine. Question number 2. In 1467, Leon Alberti designed a disk with 2 concentric alphabets, where letters in one are paired to reveal the true letter in the other. This is the exact same mechanism used in what Ovaltine product repopularized in 1983?
Decoder rings?
That's it.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh my god!
Yeah. So that is the decoder
The
ring.
famous decoder ring.
Yeah, it is exactly an Alberti disc. Except if you look in the movie, the one in the movie has an alphabet running around the outside, and then the numbers 1 to 26 running around the inside, which is essentially the same as having 2 alphabets.
Right.
But it's an extra level of hiddenness. And I referenced 1983. Does anyone want to just tell us why 1983? When it was repopularized?
Because of A Christmas Story?
Exactly. That's when A Christmas Story came out.
Nice.
And every kid wanted a BB gun and a decoder ring.
Yes. You'll shoot your eye out.
You'll shoot your eye out.
But going back to the time, not of A Christmas Story, but of A Christmas Carol, something quite similar to that, the Vignere cipher, and that's basically like there's sort of sliding alphabets past each other, and basically it's sort of a Caesar cipher where every single letter has like a different shift, and that shift is determined by a key, which can have various properties that make it more or less secure. But that general principle was thought was called, and this is again French, it's called le chiffre indéchiffrable, maybe, and that was supposed to stand for the indecipherable cipher, and I think it was actually Charles Dodgson of Lewis Carroll, real name fame, who I think it was, I want to say 1863, which is why I'm sort of throwing it around the Christmas Carol era, said that it was an unbreakable cipher, but he did not know, neither did anyone else, that just a few years early, secretly, Charles Babbage had broken it, but never published the results.
Right.
And then I forget who eventually published it, but somebody eventually showed that it wasn't in fact unbreakable.
Wow.
But as segues go, I think Christmas Story, Christmas Carol was worth it.
And speaking of Christmas Carol, if you love old British things, question number 3. So I was originally going to give you the poet and ask for the poem, but you're doing so well. I think I'm gonna deprive you of both and ask for the poet and poem. And so
No, I'm out already.
we'll try it.
Count me out.
So a British poet, fond of using acrostic devices in his poetry to drive home symbolic points, wrote a very famous poem about a fall from grace. In 2018, a graduate student found the word fall in acrostic form, triple interlaced. Can you name the poem where this poet hid the word fall? Because it's a poem about a fall from grace. And he used it in a triple interlaced acrostic, which I'll explain shortly. And if that's too much, I will give you the poet.
I don't know, would you consider Milton a poet?
I mean, if he wrote poetry in meter, I certainly would. Yeah. No, okay, if it's Milton, what would be his big poem?
Paradise Lost.
Exactly.
I was going from the
fall from grace.
That part.
Yeah. So that's exactly it. Yeah. Wow. So you guys don't need
Didn't know
the
it was an
poet.
acrostic.
But yeah, so the poet is John Milton, and his poem is Paradise Lost. And This is
Okay, it's one of those epic poems that's really a book, but
yeah. I mean, it's actually 10 books.
yeah.
It is quite a lengthy read, but it is all in verse. And so this is an amazing story. I found that in 2018, a graduate student uncovered this like really deep hidden meaning. And so there's actually this is not the first time. So Milton's now famous for working a bunch of acrostics specifically in Paradise Lost. The best example was in the 70s. One of a poetry scholar found the word Satan over the 5 lines where Satan is speaking.
Oh, I remember hearing about this.
It's super interesting. But he's Satan in the poem is the serpent, and he's saying, "Oh, I'm not Lucifer. I'm some other snake. Don't worry." And the first 5 letters of those lines are Satan. And so,
wow.
Yeah, so it's a really brilliant literary device. And this poet this poetry scholar in the 70s was like, it's so easy to lose sight of what Satan looks like that we didn't see it for 300 years written right in front of us. Just a nice allegory.
It was the snake all along.
But so
The greatest trick the devil played was convincing us he was a different snake.
But then scholars then started to pore over his works to be like, well, did he do this a lot? Because we didn't really have a record of this. So another example is in the line where Adam takes the first bite of the fruit. The 3 lines that encapsulate that action spell woe, W-O-E.
Whoa! Whoa now! Don't eat that fruit.
And the authors of that analysis, who, by the way, they went through every line of this massive poem, and then Paradise found the follow-up and all of Milton's works. They found those 2 big examples, and then they were like, we also found the words toad, dog, rats, and goof. But they're likely
That's
Wow.
this.
That might have been an
I think
accident.
it's this with a plus 13 Caesar. So.
There we go.
so they were quite excited. Maybe it was a Caesar cipher and an acrostic.
Well, was it GUVF? Would they have noticed that?
Oh, probably not. This is Goofy from Disney World, but
Oh, okay. Okay.
So you said the most recent acrostic discovery that was in 2018?
yes. And so
Okay.
That was Satan?
oh no, so Satan was the first one in the 70s. Then they
Okay.
found all these other
Right,
ones,
right.
and then they found it was or they attributed it to the fact that this was actually a literary device going back as far as Virgil, who used Mars as an acrostic when he was writing about Mars, the Roman god of war.
I've read about that.
Yeah, in the Aeneid. And then when
Right.
Dante used the word lue, L-U-E, which is plague, 9 times in Dante's Inferno as an acrostic.
Right.
So little Easter eggs like that. But so the fall thing, it's the lines where Adam and Eve are saying okay, we should each make the decision ourselves. We won't go in together. And so it's 2 separate people falling. And so the acrostic goes F-F-A-A-L-L.
Oh.
Which is why you would miss it the first time.
Right.
But then the lines below it are where Satan encourages them and takes them in, and those lines go A-F. So if you read it upwards, it's F-A-L-L into theirs. And so this graduate student, she wrote her a thesis about this, how this is a very intentional and very complex acrostic at this pivotal point in the poem about the fall from grace, also mirroring Satan's fall from grace, and then his how it sneaks up to affect humans.
Wow.
Yeah. And so really deep, really more than you thought acrostic poetry could do, maybe. And it took 350 years for someone to notice this, despite the fact it's one of the most well-read poems in English literature.
It's amazing.
The best part, though, and this is not a joke, is the graduate student who found this, and a theme that always pervades Fax Machine. Her name was Miranda Fall.
Wow.
Just
Mind blown.
incredible. And
Wow.
it's P-H-A-A-L, but
Oh no!
That counts. That counts.
she would tell you, "Hi, I'm Miranda Fall," and just blew my mind.
That's
That's
amazing.
amazing.
Oh, man.
Wow.
So yeah, another one for nominative determinism on Fax Machine.
I'm much less impressed with T.S. Eliot for being an anagram of toilets now.
Yeah. Yeah, he's really got to work his game up. All right, question number 4. The Pioneer 10 and 11 spacecrafts contain a basic cipher with information all about humanity. However, what is the key that they used to decode this cipher, which they hoped was truly universal? And so the idea is, no matter where you are in the universe, you would have, with sufficient study, knowledge of this.
I feel like it's going to be like the Fibonacci sequence or something.
So I'll just say...
What did they use on the record on Voyager? Didn't they have...
So on Voyager...
They
I think they had
constants,
Euler's formula, e to the I pi.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was it.
And so I think both of those are better answers than this one, because the Fibonacci, just based on when humans figured it out, the Fibonacci sequence is old. Euler's number is still kind of old. This, this answer, it is extremely elemental, but it requires a lot to actually study it.
Like it's like an atom structure or something?
Elemental a clue?
Like little electrons floating around the nucleus?
Basically.
That really expects a lot of the aliens.
It really does. Yeah. Okay. So the answer is they have a cipher that is laid out in the properties of a hydrogen atom.
Oh, man.
And it's like, why?
Yeah, I don't know.
And it's like, well, once they figured out the mass, they'll surely know the charge and the space. And no, what are you talking about? I find this a really pathetic cipher key. But
someday an alien grad student is going to be studying the wreck of our whatever satellite that we sent out, and they're going to be like, oh my god, my last name is hydrogen spelled in a weird way.
It's my destiny.
Oh, that makes me really happy. Okay. So
unbelievable. I'm a little disappointed by that one.
Yeah, I know. I wanted better.
That wasn't NASA's A-team working on that one.
Come on.
We need to make NASA yet another enemy of the pod. Go to outer space and stay there, NASA.
Okay. Question number 5.
Talk about ad astra.
Okay. Okay.
We really are kind of down on NASA, aren't we?
Apparently.
Because we peaked with Clyde Tombaugh, and then it was astronaut farts, and now we're here.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, that was amazing.
All right, but question number 5. So questions 1 and 5 in this quiz are your ciphers. So this is the second one I'm going to ask you to solve.
Oh, boy.
So I'll give you hints as we go, but solve this cipher. Try the first answer that you don't want. When is it true?
When is it true?
When is it true? So the full cipher. Try the first answer that you don't want. When is it true? And the trick here is laid out like a riddle, but you shouldn't try to riddle it away. So I'll slowly give you hints. This is also a relatively common cipher type for text. So not so much like a character cipher. It was featured in an episode of Sherlock, season 2, if you like Sherlock.
I do, but I
It did
don't
for a
remember
bit.
it that well.
Man, I haven't watched it.
Okay. So this is one that you could literally, if I said it again and you knew the crack, you could get it. You wouldn't have to sit to decipher it. You'd only have to hear the right parts. So I'll give you one more listen if that helps. Try the first answer that you don't want. When is it true?
The answer you want is true.
Yes. So that is a skip cipher.
I see.
Oh, brother.
Mm-hmm.
I see. I see.
So it's a tricky one, and it is like in terms of ciphers, it's one of the ones you can get just sitting there listening to it, which makes it hard.
Right.
Because
because
you don't seem to. It doesn't seem to be a cipher there.
It seems too obvious. Yep.
I kind of like the sort of context. I like the idea that you could use that people might know the answer to that is like, oh, you have to use the answer you want is true, but then use the other one. So the answer would really be, try first that, don't win it. And then somehow you could like hide something in that. Like there'd be a second layer based on like that inside joke maybe of like,
That's if you're
Well, that was a good one for a podcast, actually.
that was the struggle, was what's a cipher that you can talk out and that isn't incredibly boring.
The only reason I got that was that you kind of said it in the like iambic pentameter way of like alternating the stress.
I was wondering why you were doing that.
That's the
Yeah, I was wondering too.
Yes.
Didn't jump out at me.
I was like, Rob's just being a robot. It's fine. Whatever. Moving on.
Okay. Question number 6.
a robot. I'm sorry. It took me a second.
Rob.
The answer you want. Beep borp.
That value is false.
It was very Dalek-esque.
Wait, does Robot Rob have wine borps?
Robot.
Robot, sorry.
Wine borps.
That's so cute.
Wine borps. That's the funniest thing I've ever heard.
And I now want there to be like a Billy Shears-esque conspiracy for the pod where everyone's like, this is the episode that Rob was swapped out for a robot. Just tracing the evidence from there.
That's funny, but that's invalid.
Ray, I don't think we've explained to you that there's a very long running thing, and it's not like an intentional joke so much as it is just in every episode. And it's not always wine, but there are wine burps that are very audible, just from we're all drinking, and so that you inevitably hear like.
It's fantastic radio.
Wine borps.
Who does the editing around here?
No, it does.
So you get to hear all the wine borps then.
Yes. In our original blooper episode, which was like extra little bits and just us fucking up, there was a lot of this. And a lot of the like, whoo, boy. And this is when we all used to record in the same room too.
Yeah.
Didn't you make like a little
man.
supercut at one point too? Or just like a bunch of them stitched together?
Yeah.
It's not pretty.
A little visceral, but it's fun.
Anyway.
Okay. So, question 6. We're almost there. Question number 6. In Dan Brown's Angels and Demons, what calligraphic method is used to hide words upside down or to inscribe words read in both directions?
Oh, what's it called? It's not an anagram. What's it called where it's like the same thing?
I was gonna say anagram.
Yeah, but it's purely
Palindrome.
Or palindrome.
No,
Oh, yeah.
It's something like, it sounds kind of like anagram, but it's not.
And so the trick is how it can be read. If you read it forwards.
Ambigram?
Yeah, an ambigram.
Okay.
Oh, I like that.
And
prefix.
so-
But it's purely, as you said, like calligraphic, I guess is the way to say it. Where it's just it's like the way that the letters are written that makes them ambiguous enough that you could be like, oh, I could see how that's both a P and a D.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
And
I
it's
see.
often written either so that you can read the word right side up, and then when you flip it, it's the same, or
It's the same.
when you read it, it's a new word. So like in the book, I think he does. There's like a box where you can read. It's like a painting, but it's the word sin, and every way you read it, it reads sin or something like that. Or it's like fire one way and water the other way. It's a really cool technique.
They're really beautiful when you look at them. Sometimes they're like in an actual geometric shape that the calligraphy is in, and you flip them around, and yeah.
All right, 2 questions left.
Okay, just let's go. Come on, we're so close.
All right, question number 7. Developed at MIT in the 70s by 3 engineers, what end-to-end encryption utilizes both a public key and a private key from the recipient, making the information encrypted much safer? And so...
PGP.
Oh, sorry.
PGP encryption.
Oh.
PGP, pretty good privacy.
Yeah. So, yeah, that is true. So I'm actually going for a specific PGP, which is named after the... Yeah. So it's
Just repeat the question.
Developed at MIT in the 70s by 3 engineers, And those 3 engineers, they actually lent their names to the very specific kind of example of this.
The RSA?
Yeah, RSA.
Encryption key? Is that what you mean? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, Ray.
Boom.
Sorry, my God. I'm like, this is my world.
Slam dunk. Don't make me try to answer that question. Yes, Ray. I love it. I love the energy.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's PGP. What do you mean? Really, I was really revving over here.
And I'm sitting here being like, she definitely knows better than me.
oh, shit.
But so
RSA.
So and that's right. RSA is like a subclass or like a specific type.
Yes, that's correct.
I was sitting over here like 3 engineers at MIT. What did they develop? I was like, carpal tunnel.
Oh, that's so good. Also true.
But yeah. So RSA is kind of like
it's a crypto system.
Yeah, and it's kind of it's not necessarily state of the art, but it's kind of state of trade. Like everyone uses this.
That's correct.
And it's great because basically you receiving the message tell the message how to get encrypted, and then you encrypt it later with a different decryption key.
That's right.
So far, I believe has not been like successfully cracked, or like that specific part of it has not been. You can kind of crack around it, I guess, but like that actual sending process is very secure.
Yeah, that's the most standard. That's the most secure standard form of encryption that we have currently for use on the internet. Yeah.
Wow. So crack that code and you own the internet.
It's like a sweepstakes.
Well, you utilize the public key for sending, right? But then the receiver has a private key to encrypt. So it's very difficult to crack that. But with quantum computing, which is the next phase of technology, that will be, you could brute force something like that really quickly. So not for long.
Bummer.
You always find a way to crack it. So.
Well, for now, keep texting people things that you don't want anyone else to see, because for now, they're sort of safe.
Send nudes while you can.
That's it. Use Signal.
All right. And our 8th and final question. In 2012, the book Regenesis became the first book translated into what coded language?
You have to give us...
Wait, has that coded language been referenced in this episode?
Stunningly, I don't think we've talked about this code.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was
is that the RNA, or is that the DNA? Is that the book that they did in DNA?
Shit.
Is that what that is?
It is.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
The only reason why I thought that is because I was like, ooh, he's a scientist. You.
Most people,
you were the clue, Rob.
Most people, when they look at Rob, they do go, ew, he's a scientist.
I didn't say ew.
But it's like you said, Noah, the breadcrumbs are there all along. Yeah, that's totally right. So the book Regenesis is actually a book about basically writing in the code of DNA. I said the book was translated. My hint to you was going to be it was actually transcribed.
You jerk.
But so it is, if anyone asks, it is the book for which there are the most copies on Earth. They have 70 billion copies of this book. However, it is not well read.
Oh my God.
But yeah, that was the team up in the kind of synthetic DNA team up at Harvard, MIT. George Church was one of the primary authors. And it was actually a big scandal at the time because the team up there had also just made the first synthetic cell, I believe, with Craig Venter. And so the idea of like throwing around DNA lightly was like really frowned upon, because initially they wanted in the book cover of every book to be like a little like sealed off thing with just the DNA of the book.
Oh.
What a racket.
Yeah, and they would have charged like a bunch more for it, and like they clearly made it. They have 70 billion transcripts of this book. And it cost like whatever like
just a few.
Yeah. I mean, that's honestly like 2 days of PCR. That's not
Exactly. That's why I'm like, really? That's how you need to make money? I'm in the wrong business. Clearly.
But they decided not to do it because of concerns over bioterrorism, bioethics, like all like ridiculous things that they were like, you can't just put DNA in a book. And you're like, every book you ever took.
It's not hard to get DNA.
Also, there's already DNA on the book. It's everywhere. I've run enough contaminated experiments to know that. Shit's everywhere.
Where do you find in the book where the pages are stuck together?
Yes, on that happy note. So excellent work, everyone. You've made it through the entire crypto quiz. You've decoded me to the core. Way to go.
Woohoo!
So that's our crypto show. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And Ray, it was wonderful to have you on this episode. Is there anything upcoming you want to talk about?
Well, we'll have some exciting articles and short films released on CoriolisMagazine.com in coming weeks. So definitely check that out.
Absolutely. So everyone go online, follow Coriolis Magazine on Twitter and Instagram, and check out their website. You can also check out our website, faxmachinepodcast.com, and please follow us on social media. We are on Instagram and Twitter at FaxMachinePod, and on Facebook at FaxMachine Podcast. And if you'd like to follow us individually, I'm SweaterVest SCI, Noah
At Arcs and Sciences.
M
At _EM Costa.
And Ray, where can we find you?
At Doc Rocket, that's DOCR0CKET, Twitter and Instagram.
Fax Machine is produced by Rob Frawley, Noah Giberson, and Emily Costa, with editing by Noah Giberson. Our theme music is by Anthony Antonelli, and our logo was designed by Mike Zola. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.